it's a complex, of course, environment. In my opinion, the crisis, the economical crisis of the 90s in Cuba, when the socialist and Soviet empire collapsed, for our country in terms of ideological repression was a blessing. Suddenly, for the first time, writers could publish outside Cuba without being put into jail, as happened to Reinaldo Arenas in the 70s. Suddenly, money, we know all Latin countries, either, but the market was pressuring, and money was the activity of writing. For the first time, a writer in Cuba could have money because of their writing. That was not allowed in the 70s and in the 80s. Or you had to be very official to be allowed officially to receive your copyrights for a novel published outside. Suddenly there was like a blessing. It happened to the music, it happened to the visual artists, and of course it happened to the mentality that, although in my opinion the system is still behaving as an ancien regime, an old system from an old era, sometimes I call it like a paleo revolution, but somehow the writers very easily, in a very normal way, especially newest generation, younger than me, where it was very easy, very natural in them not to respect the traditional limits that for decades were considered as censor or difficulties for the intellectual in the social system. No. And also the characteristic will be not complaining too much. These writers are just acting, publishing, most of them in blogs. They are not waiting for a Cuban editor to include them in their catalog. They are just already taking a space, occupying a space of their own. And in my opinion, it has been a blessing for the future, although in economical terms, it represented a hard situation, not for my people. First of all, the term Afro-Cuban in Cuba is, from theoretical points of view, from the people's points of view, quite unknown. Only recently, with the approach of some academic traveling from Cuba to outside or publishing, or receiving and reading some literature on the history of the Afro-Americans, for instance, in Cuba, this term is started to be in use. But usually, in my humble opinion, Afro-Cuban writers are not trying to distinguish themselves because of their poetics. They form part of, maybe they can be considered more in political terms or social terms, or even from religious point of view, but the terms of race in Cuba, because of the very process of the revolution, in my opinion, in literature, it will not be expressed as a typical Afro-Cuban literature. That's my opinion. In a selection of writers, in that term, that would be not, for my opinion as an editor, will not be a point of consideration, because I cannot find it would be the same in this kind of approach, when you are trying to approach a literary concept. It would be the same, maybe that the whole anthology could be 16 men, not without any women, and yet for me it will not constitute like discrimination in terms of gender, because we are not looking for justice. We are looking for a provocative vision that maybe is shared by only 3 writers, Cuba, maybe by 10, maybe by 16, but we are looking for the text. The text could be asexual, plurisexual, multiracial, cosmopolitan, but also despotic, criminal. So we have like a faith in literature, and we will not be approaching in a more ecumenical or democratic way. Fiction is like, for us, no? It's like a different place where I cannot distinguish, in my humble approach, I cannot distinguish very well the questions of more sociological or from social justice, like would be race, sex, gender, another consideration. No? I see it more like that you are dealing with literary tradition and not specifically with a realistic point of view in terms of sociology. No? Not asking, that was what social, maybe this is because that was what socialist realism was asking to the Cuban writers in the 70s, and somehow in this new generation there is like a reaction not to behave in a very mirror way to the society, but always trying to dynamize it in a way that it could be only partially recognizable. And so the troubles will be there, and the question, if you're reading, for sure will detect those questions in their literature, those violences, those differences, you will detect it, but the writer, I cannot speak for them, but in my opinion, they are not trying to behave as a writer with a determinate position beforehand. They will try to live a residual freedom of reading for the reader. Many of these writers of generation year zero started by publishing themselves their fiction. They were giving it for free for the world to know, because they had like this urge of communication. Some of them are published in Cuba, or part of their work, the one that the state editorials, the publishing houses can publish, are published inside Cuba, and another part is not published, will be censored, but they are not waiting, no? And so they have created blogs and digital magazines. These digital magazines and blogs from writers are not so known in the world, because as everything happens, literature somehow is difficult to read or to understand or to process. Suddenly the blogs phenomenon has become world known because of the politics or the social activism. I myself am a social activist, and I have an opinion column blog. There is the renowned Joanny Sanchez Generation Y blog and many others in vocescubanas.com website that has been trying to push what I call the borders of censorship and trying to strive for freedom of expression. In this case, yes, for the rights of minorities inside Cuba. So it's a completely different environment where writers, fiction writers, although they also might be social activists, but somehow it's not mixing the territories. Maybe one challenge for the future is that, the way that dissidents or political oppositors or activists are approaching literature, in a way they are not approaching literature in a very modern way. They are still what we call old readers, and somehow revolutionary subjects, even in the dissident field. And we are trying to make an effort to break these mental barriers and try to let them know that creation can approach reality by a different way, indirect way, and that a lot for democracy of my country, maybe not for today, but for tomorrow, can be done also within literature, but not as a direct denouncement, not as a pamphlet, but by trying to express the intimate, the secret soul of a nation that maybe will not exist forever. It's an imaginary nation, but or at least, in my opinion, is approaching a post-national status, where it could be somehow what happens in a generation of a disintegration process can also be happening in the nation. In Havana City, we are privileged, but I have to mention that the Cuban citizens, at least today, they are saying officially now that maybe this year the situation will change. But any Cuban citizen, you don't need to be a blogger, any Cuban citizen cannot rent an internet account for their places, or cannot have internet in their mobile phones. They say that it's going to change. Although, if you are belonging to some state enterprises, state institution, including university, you will start receiving different levels of controlled internet. One of them is called internet. It means you will only connect to domains.cu. So it will be like recreation of a closed environment with internet. You will have the illusion of freedom, but all your content, including Wikipedia, there is a clone of Wikipedia in Cuba, which is called Ecurareta. And when you try to administrate or to include new content, it will be very difficult. In Havana City, we have tourist hotels, and tourists, for us, is a blessing. Because when we go to those tourist hotels, they have music, mulatas, everything, daiquiri, Cuba Libre, but, mojito, but we bloggers, we pay up to $10 1 hour, American dollars, 1 hour, for having a Wi-Fi connection to internet, and then trying to send all the information possible, trying to post and schedule our blogs to be published during the week, because we cannot be paying for that as a regular mail. And then we have foreign democratic countries that are helping the Cuban people with giving some free access to internet in limited times, but persons going to embassies are immediately stigmatized by the government and called mercenaries. You go to a foreign country to publish content that will be critical to your country, The equation is perfect. There is international comparison. And then, and this is the last point, but not the least, we have the black market. From the Soviet moment, Soviets were specialists in black market, and we inherited that. So I can buy hours of internet, paying in dollars, to a person that maybe is a webmaster of a state enterprise. I would be risking to commit a common crime. In the case of a social activist, that would not be possible. But the whole of the society is doing it. They are getting access, and now it's easier to send a message to somebody in Cuba, and you can get the answer maybe the next day. But which are the real numbers? How many persons? We don't know, because it's black market. Alternative market, I call it sometimes, because it's part of the generalized corruption, because you don't have the option. It's not that they are doing this to save money. It's because they don't have the right to connect, and so they think, okay, this is my right. I will occupy this space. It's black market, it's my right, no? Because I don't have the option to do it legally. It's not the best moment about working together in Cuba, unfortunately. Solidarity under socialism is very suspicious right now. There was, 5 years ago, it was created in Oriente provinces, in Holguín city. The writers from Oriente, escritores de Oriente, by the poet Luis Felipe Roja and Michael Miranda, and it was not censored. It was independent, and it was immediately repressed by the political police. So at that moment, the writers stopped to be considered a writer, as it happened to me for other reasons, and then the government will consider you a political opponent. And almost no writer in Cuba, unfortunately, is trying to make that step. I have a digital magazine called Voces. I invite all persons inside Cuba and outside Cuba, no matter if they are members of the Communist Party, they are invited to publish in Voces, because we are trying to create, in this case with Voces, an ecumenical space. But with the magazine, we are inviting persons and trying to build bridges of understanding. And then, even official writers or persons that are being publishing very critical novels in Spain are not risking to collaborate with my tiny, humble, independent magazine, because they will be losing their privilege of traveling inside and outside Cuba. The government can prevent you to move free very easy. They can lose their status of being published in Cuba, although they don't need that, because they are publishing in Spain, and they are making their living in Spain. So it's very complicated, and all the time inside Cuba I receive more insolidarity than solidarity. And sometimes my colleagues, or the more solidary person that I find, are persons that I don't know, that are in the cyberspace, that are even helping with the design of the magazine, even in New York. And so I call this network like a virtual citizenship. It's not working for today, because the government has perfect governability. It's working maybe with hope for the future, no? When we will be easy to see each other's face, and there will be no barrier between the exile and the person that remains. It will be more like a reconciliation of our nation. Our nation has a serious trouble about this. It's like a split nation. Limited, certainly limited. I published 4 fiction books in Cuba before I had very ugly trouble with censorship, and then I was told that I was never to publish again in Cuba. I'm trying to survive enough to prove them they are wrong, but by now I cannot publish in Cuba. It has happened to some of these writers to limited extent. The system is learning to allow part of your work to be published and discard part of your work, because all the publishing houses are state-run. But my 4 books published in Cuba, when I went to Camagüey province, to Matanzas province, to Oriente, I had to take my book with me. I was my best buyer. I was a bestseller because I was my best buyer. And then I was taking my books and trying to distribute them, because they were not buying, or the distribution was not good. Even when it was a state-run enterprise, it was not working. It was inefficient. And so I was feeling, oh my God, I have 4 books and I am not known inside Cuba. And so the internet was like a breakthrough. Okay, I will not be read in Cuba anymore. Never mind. I will be tossing this bottle to the ocean. Somebody will be reading. Maybe my readers are in the United States, in Spain, in Madrid, wherever there is a Cuban, but why only Cubans? Why only Cuban when maybe my literature is more close to the soul of a Mexican than to my neighbor in Havana that could be a member of a repressive institution. Suddenly, the paradigms are changing very fast. I cannot tell you exactly. And now I am known in Cuba, but not as I wanted to be known. I am known as a social activist that has been repressed, and the mass media, the hegemonic media, are broadcasting back to Cuba, and persons in Cuba have pirate TV, satellite, and they are watching my name there, but not because of my blog or because of my literature. So again, the logic of mass media is working in my country, and this citizen journalism is little by little working. Most of the writers are very well known in Cuba because of their names, could appear in the press, not my name, but maybe they are not reading them so much. I am sure that indeed it has happened already in a debate that occurred a few weeks ago in Havana. They were discussing again about Generation Year Zero, and in my opinion they were trying to, maybe it's possible that the Cuban institution will be proposing a generation inside Cuba in a way that they could counter-attack to this anthology. Because some of my friends have told me now, by the social networking, that the Letras Cubanas publishing house is making an offering now to make an anthology after 5-6 years that we were completely disregarded. So they are always reacting. At some point they are reactionary in this, no? Reacting all the time.